Coming up on this episode, the latest on a potential Nikola Vucevic move to Golden State as part of an overall look on what the Warriors should be doing here over the next few days and what their rotation could look like coming out of the trade deadline. Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. Hope you've all had a good weekend. It was a good Australia Day long weekend here for me. I was able to sit up last night and watch my Hobart Hurricanes win their maiden BBL title. Took 14 years to do so, but to be able to get the job done in such stunning fashion last night at home was truly incredible. One of the biggest sporting highlights of my life, it must be said, particularly when, I'm pretty close to it. I've played with and against some of the guys in the team back in my youth glory days. So for them to go out and play the way they did and beat the Sydney Thunder quite convincingly was absolutely amazing for the state of Tasmania where I live, for the city of Hobart where I live. And I'm not expecting many people in America to necessarily care or understand what I'm talking about, but cricket is obviously such a big part of Australian culture, and for the Hobart Hurricanes to finally get the job done was huge for us here in this very little state, it must be said. But we're here to talk NBA basketball and the Golden State Warriors. So a few things here. We've got the NBA trade deadline coming up, 10 days away. Obviously, plenty of stuff going on, just more reports from Shams here in the last 15, 20 minutes that the Heat have once again decided to suspend Jimmy Butler from playing over the next, I think they suspended him indefinitely now, which to me, like, your trade leverage is your trade leverage. At this point, you might as well just mutually agree that, he'll sit at least until the deadline, and obviously you'd hope that a trade would be forthcoming until then. We know it's not going to be the Warriors, but the one player the Warriors have consistently been strongly linked to is, of course, Nikola Vucevic, the Chicago Bulls center, who's still averaging over 20 points, 10 rebounds, and 3 assists, still shooting in excess of 40% from three-point range this season. The latest on him from NBA insider Mark Stein earlier today, who said in relation to the Warriors and Vucevic that the Warriors have been at the front of the line in terms of potential Vucevic shooters for weeks, but mired in a 10-20 funk that had them stuck at a lowly number 11 in the Western Conference entering Monday's play, have to date been unwilling to surrender more than second-round draft capital. So it sounds at the moment the Warriors are willing to give up the expiring contracts that it will take, the contracts in general, obviously the expiring contracts of Gary Payton II, Kevon Looney, the main ones there, and then third player would also have to be involved. That could be really anyone. I think most likely either Buddy Hield, Kyle Anderson, the expiring contract maybe of Dennis Schroder as well, perhaps Moses Moody, but he's been pretty good for the Warriors, must be said, lately in a more solidified rotation role with the injuries that Golden State have been dealing with. So really fascinating to see what happens with Nikola Vucevic. One of the big things here, I think, in trade negotiations, and perhaps the more significant aspect to this from a Warrior perspective in this Stein trade report, is to do with the Los Angeles Lakers, and they've been a team ever since Anthony Davis last week came out to ESPN Shams Charania and said that, hey, we need another big. I prefer to play at the 4. I want to play a power forward. I want to have another big man next to me. Ever since then, obviously, trade speculation around the Lakers potentially getting a big man has been rife, and Vucevic has been one of those names that they have been linked to as a possible player to go and get to pair next to Anthony Davis. Well, Stein in this report said that league sources stressed over the weekend that the Lakers are not expected to join in the hunt for either Vucevic or Toronto's Jakob Poeltl. Said that Jonas Valanciunas might be a more realistic target for them. I think the dream target for the Lakers is probably Miles Turner, who's been linked to them going back quite some years. Obviously, from a Warrior perspective, Miles Turner would probably be the dream target, as well as a guy who can stretch the floor, shoot 5 threes a game, close, high 30, close to 40% from three. But not only that, and what similar production offensively that Vucevic can deliver, but also the defense and the shot blocking, rim protection that Vucevic is not known for whatsoever. In fact, it goes the opposite way in terms of Vucevic and his question marks defensively. Now, the big question here is whether Golden State should actually make a move for Vucevic before the deadline. It's been super fascinating here to see the development and the unearthing of Quinton Post over the last 3 games. He's now come into really over the last 2 games, Golden State's number one center. He played 42 total minutes across the two most recent meetings against, ironically, the Bulls and the Lakers, as opposed to Kevon Looney, who only played 29, and Trace Jackson-Davis played 24. So all of a sudden, Quinton Post is almost the Warriors' number one center. Now, will that continue? Possibly. We'll wait and see. Obviously, the trade deadline is going to play a big part in it. Do we want that to be the case? Like, I put out a poll on Blue Man Hoops social media yesterday stating, who should be the Warriors starting center moving forward. And I think nearly 60% of people who replied to that said Quinton Post. So for me personally, I don't think we should be relying necessarily on a rookie center as like our starting big man. And I think that's really the direction it's heading at the moment in terms of the minutes he's played over these last 2 games as opposed to Looney and Jackson-Davis. But not only that, you think of Draymond Green, the latest update on him is he's day-to-day, so he's going to return imminently. And you would think that with Draymond back in the lineup, it would make even more sense to play Quinton Post next to him, to go away from these dire, offensively limited starting lineups that have Draymond alongside either Looney or TJD. So it would make even more sense for Quinton Post to be a starter when, and I was going to say if, but it's going to be a matter of when Draymond comes back to the starting lineup. So super fascinated to see. I personally don't think we should be relying solely on a rookie center to be our starter. Now, yeah, you've still got Loon and TJD. And ultimately here, where are the Warriors going? Right? Is it worth making a deal and sending out 2 championship veterans, 2 players that mean a lot to the franchise in Looney and Gary Payton II, for a Nikola Vucevic type who is probably going to make the Warriors better, but not significantly better enough, as Brian Windhorst and Tim Bontemps reported in their latest trade intel last week, that there's no trade target, obviously including Vucevic, out there that is going to catapult the Warriors and inspire a top 6 playoff run here over the second half of the season. Now, I'm a little bit more optimistic than that. That's just my nature, and obviously there's a little bit of fan bias in there. But what I think we've seen from Quinton Post here over the last 3 days is that it shouldn't go, the last 3 games, I should say, is that it shouldn't go under the radar how impactful a stretch 5 could be to this Warrior offense. We know Golden State's offensive struggles over basically the majority of the season, but particularly going back to like the start of December, if you pinpoint that date. Like, they have been a bottom 10 offense in the league. Well, I know it's a small sample size, and maybe it's a coincidence, but I don't think it is. In the last 3 games, since Quinton Post has really come into a legitimate rotation role, the Warriors are averaging 118.8 points per game. They're 8th in points per game over the last 3, and they're 6th in offensive rating. Now, again, small sample size, but that small sample size also includes Stephen Curry going for 13 points and 0 second half points against the Lakers on Saturday. Like, how often is Steph Curry going to go for 0 points in the second half? It's not going to happen. So the fact the Warriors have those numbers, even though Steph did what he did on Saturday against the Lakers, I think is quite remarkable and provides some optimism here of, hey, you actually have a stretch 5 out on the floor for significant minutes for at least half the game, which is basically what we've seen from Quinton Post here over the last 2. You have someone like that out on the floor. This is what it can do for the offense. All of a sudden, the offense might go from, bottom 10 in the league to at least above average. And that's going to significantly aid the Warriors, and potentially, there's 37 games to go. Can the Warriors try and go like 23-14 or something like that and get to 45 wins and see where that lands? It probably doesn't even land them a top 6 seed, but it would at least, you'd imagine, get them into the play-in tournament, and probably, that first 7-8 games give themselves a double chance at making the playoffs. So I do think it goes under the radar here just how much a stretch big, regardless of the name, could actually help. Again, I think going to get Vucevic on top of Post and having both guys and perhaps being able to play 48 minutes of having a stretch 5 on the floor, having a stretch 5 next to Draymond, next to Kuminga, being able to potentially play Kuminga, Draymond in a stretch 5 together. I think that's really, really important here. So in terms of a trade, I think we've got to hopefully, take into account the Lakers not being interested in Vucevic, and therefore perhaps the market dwindling a little bit. Obviously, at the moment, the Bulls want a first-round draft pick. The Warriors only willing to give up second-round draft capital. We'll see if anyone blinks here over the next 10 days. I have some optimism. Again, some glass half full approach that maybe with a thinning market, there really hasn't been too many other teams linked to Vucevic. Like, who wants him out there? And if that's the case, and really it's only the Warriors, then there's not really much leverage for Chicago in talks. They also obviously owe their first round pick that's top 10 protected to the San Antonio Spurs. So they want to be bad enough to be able to get a top 10 pick, which they're on the precipice right now. They're in a position where they likely keep their pick, but with the draft lottery system, obviously it could fall out still. And, they win a few games here and things can very quickly change. So the Warriors should have some leverage in this scenario to say, hey, like, who are we bidding against? The Lakers are out. What other team has been linked to Vucevic? What other team wants to make a trade for him? And therefore, perhaps the Warriors can get away with giving up. I think they've got 2 second-round picks to trade now after obviously making the Schroder deal. I think for the Warriors, that should be the move. It should be 2 second-round picks. And for me, GP2, Looney, and one of Buddy Hield or Kyle Anderson. That would probably be the trade for me. I don't think it's very exciting for Chicago whatsoever. But again, are they motivated enough to try and make sure they do land that top 10 pick so they don't have to give it away to San Antonio this year? We'll wait and see. But again, maybe semi-optimistic on the potential of that happening. So where would that leave the Warriors here post-trade deadline of what we could see? So to me, getting Vucevic or even starting Quinton Post, whichever you want to do, to me would be all about trying to try again, I suppose, with the starting lineup the Warriors began the season with, which was obviously Steph, Wiggins, Kuminga, Draymond, and TJD. Now, that quickly found out, obviously, that there wasn't enough shooting out on the floor, but again, you get a stretch five, whether it's Vucevic or whether you just decide to accelerate Quinton Post into a starting role, then the idea of that can kind of come back to the fore. So to me, you go and get Vucevic, starting lineup post-deadline here, once Kuminga comes back from injury, which he's going to be reevaluated in another 2 weeks by the sounds of it. It should be Steph, Wiggins, Kuminga, Draymond, Vucevic. Now, there is size there. There is some defensive issues still, but I think there's, not the 3-guard lineup, the small 3-guard lineups, which we've been seeing recently. There's not the Steph Curry, Buddy Hield backcourt, which can be exposed defensively. So there are some defensive concerns still, particularly, Vucevic as an opposing big man trying to come up against the best big man in the league. But I don't think there's any more pressing defensive concerns than what there already is in terms of Steve Kerr often going to these small ball lineups. So to me, that's their best balance of offense and defense, and particularly going bigger, which I think, that's been such a refreshing sight for Warrior fans, is to see Quinton Post out there, a guy who's legit 7 foot, who, yes, he has his own defensive concerns and issues and things that he needs to work on here as he develops. But just to have that size and that kind of player being a deterrent for the Warriors, again, is, having a legitimate 7-footer out there. Sorry, I'm really struggling early in the morning here. Having a legitimate 7-footer out there is really, it's a sight to behold for Warrior fans who've so often had to see a 6'9" Looney, the 6'9" Jackson Davis, who, Jackson Davis has got athleticism, but you look at him trying to guard AD the other day. Some of these closeouts and some of this stuff at the rim, his athleticism doesn't really come into it because he's undersized anyway, right? And it just doesn't make up for it. As Post, he's a legit 7-footer, and I've actually been impressed with some of his shot contests here over these last 3 games since he's entered a rotation role. So Vucevic, not a 7-footer, 6'10", some defensive concerns, obviously, but he's a very good rebounder. Hopefully Draymond will be able to help in terms of that defensive capability in the front court, I suppose. You've got Kuminga with size, and he was also rebounding the ball at a very high level prior to injury. You've got Wiggins there, who's obviously going to step into more of being that primary perimeter defender, which he has been, obviously, but there has been some serious question marks and issues, I suppose, when you're starting with what Steve is doing at the moment in terms of Steph, Buddy Hield, GP2, and I know GP2 is a very good defender, but he's also 6'2", and having 3 guards, basically 6'3", 6'4", or under, it's not going to work. It's not going to cut it. It's not exciting to watch either, and that's the thing here is, I do think, and I've said this before on a couple of the post-game live episodes, I think that there needs to be, like, the franchise, yes, okay, we as a fan base can acknowledge that, hey, they're probably not going to go on a deep playoff run. They're probably not going to be contenders this season. But you want to see some excitement. You want to leave the season thinking, you know what, we saw that over the second half of the season. And there's some optimism going into the following year, because that's when the momentum rolls. Look at the Warriors 2021-22 championship. That was really born from the end of the 2020-21 season, where the Warriors finished 15-5 in their last 20 games. Yes, they didn't make the playoffs still, but they really got some momentum. And even you could say last year, like, the Warriors finished 27-12 last season, had a really good end to the year. There was, you look at Podziemski and Jackson Davis, and there was some real bright points there. And then they come out and start this season. They win every preseason game. They start the season 12-3. So I think it goes under the radar how much momentum can be built from a strong second half of the season. And that's why I don't want the Warriors to necessarily just lie down here and accept their fate. And accepting their fate to me would be, all right, let's move out Gary Payton II for a minimum contract or whatever. Maybe even give up a second-round draft pick for someone to take his contract so we get under the luxury tax. And we're no longer a luxury tax team. Now, I can see particularly the long-term beneficiaries of that, maybe, but to me, that would just be a sign of, hey, we're succumbing to our fate here. We know we're not going to be a playoff team, so let's just chill over the second half of the season, basically. That would be frustrating to me. I know it would be frustrating to a lot of fans. And so, therefore, I still want the Warriors to be buyers here before the trade deadline, not sellers. In terms of the bench, this is where it gets interesting as well. Obviously, with the starting lineup I just mentioned, the bench to me, Schroder, Podziemski, Moody, Santos, Post. Now, I think to me, this whole 10-man rotation, Steve might end up going to 11. Who knows what he's going to do. But to me, this 10-man rotation offers not only the best team that the Warriors can actually put on the floor right now, but it also is the rotation that prioritizes the youth and hopefully raises the value of guys like Kuminga, Moody, Post, Santos, Podziemski. Like, those five guys are all going to be considerable parts of the rotation based on what I'm saying here. And so, again, not only is it the best team I think the Warriors can put on the court and the best rotation Steve Kerr can have, right, in terms of balancing offense and defense, balancing, again, defensive integrity with plenty of shooting on the floor, it also prioritizes the youth and the future movement, which we know Golden State as a franchise are still very much invested in, and they've been unwilling to give up not only their current young players, but their future draft capital as well. In terms of that bench unit, so Schroder is an interesting one for me. Clearly hasn't worked with the Warriors so far. I thought his first half against the Lakers on Saturday was excellent. It was probably his best stint as a Warrior. Had 10 points, 4 of 6 shooting, a couple of assists. It was really good. And then the second half, not only was he bad, but he didn't take a field goal. He was not aggressive whatsoever. He had 2 turnovers. It was a really, really poor display from him in the second half. The issue for me, like, a lot of people would look at Schroder and say, okay, well, this just hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. We can trade him again in the final 24 hours before the deadline. That's what we need to do, right? So I can understand that. Okay, it hasn't worked. Let's move on. We've seen enough already. Let's trade him on February 5 or February 6. The issue with that is that Brandon Podziemski's form, to me, actually is quite a product of Schroder's presence. And if you look at the numbers on Brandon Podziemski here, since or prior to and since Schroder's arrival. So prior to Schroder's arrival, Podziemski was like 7.5 points a game. He was like 36% shooting from the floor. He was like 30% from 3-point range. In the 9 games, now obviously he missed a big span, missed 12 games with that abdominal injury, but Pods has still played 9 games since Schroder's arrival on December 15. And he's averaged, I think, 9.9 points and about 2.5 points more per game. He's shooting 53.2% from the field and 50% from the 3-point range. Now, maybe part of it is literally just, okay, there's a bit of a shooting variance here in terms of, okay, he shot really badly at the start of the season. He's not that bad a shooter. He's not this good a shooter either where he's 50%. But, overall, like, this is what happens during an NBA season is that the numbers will flatline themselves out into who you are as probably a mid-30% 3-point shooter if you're Brandon Podziemski. So maybe it's just a stretch here where he's kind of making up for the horrible shooting at the start of the season. He's shooting 50% from three. But I don't necessarily think it's just that. I think it's, hey, we're not asking him to be the primary backup point guard, the primary shot creator now. He's able to get into more of a combo guard role where, yeah, he can still handle the ball a bit. Yeah, he can still play make for you a little bit, but he doesn't have to necessarily do that first and foremost. And it allows him to do so many of the other things in terms of rebounding, taking charges, playing defense, shooting the ball in catch and shoot opportunities, and being able to be that really flexible, effective NBA player that we saw in his rookie year where he led the Warriors in plus minus. If you look at his plus minus numbers as well, before and after Schroeder's arrival, he was 8th in average plus minus before Dennis Schroder came to the Warriors. He's first in average plus minus since. So that to me shows you like Pods has gone back to being an effective NBA player, and I think it's probably gone under the radar a little bit, and the injury is certainly part of that. He's only played 9 games here with Schroeder and has missed the 12 games with the ab injury. But I think that's still enough of a sample size to show, hey, this guy's not necessarily a primary point guard, but he can be a really effective combo guard and really do a lot of things out for you on the floor that helps winning. That's what we saw in his rookie year, and I think he's getting back to doing that. And so trading Schroeder and not bringing back another proven backup point guard, if we're just throwing Pods back into that role, I think that's going to be bad for the team, and it's going to be really bad for his development individually. And so that's the issue there with trading Schroeder, is it's not Schroeder, it's actually what he does for Podziemski and what he can do for others as well. And so if we're trading Schroeder, which I'm not against, but if we were, then you have to bring back another point guard into the mix. And I'm not sure who that guy is. Like, what point guards are out in the market right now that are an upgrade from Dennis Schroeder? Now, if you could extrapolate a deal with the Bulls and include Dennis Schroeder and maybe get Kobe White back, then yeah, absolutely. But then you'd have to give up at least one first-round pick, probably multiple, and I'm not sure the Warriors are necessarily going to be interested in that, even if the Bulls are. So, again, I'm not sure if there's an upgrade from Schroeder in any way. Maybe there's a guy who's not necessarily seen as an upgrade, but we think might be a better fit for the Warriors style. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think if you're watching this on YouTube. Let me know down in the comments. Is there a point guard in the league, a backup point guard that you would like the Warriors to try and target that is going to be realistically available here before the deadline that you could replace Dennis Schroeder with? Because if you trade him and you get a big, or you get a forward, or you just don't bring in another point guard, then all of a sudden, like, you're thrusting Podziemski back into that backup point guard role, and that's just not good for the team. We saw that through the first 30 games or so. Like, Pods just was not effective in that role whatsoever. Maybe one day he will be. Maybe one day in a couple of years he'll be ready to take on like a real primary shot creator playmaking role. Second year, it's a big ask for him. I think it was way too big an ask going into the season. I spoke about during the offseason, that was a real deficiency that the Warriors lacked. Part of going out and getting Schroeder was to make sure they had a proper veteran point guard on the floor at all times. And yes, Schroeder hasn't been good, but I still think his impact on Podziemski shouldn't go under the radar at all. Moody and Santos at the 3 and the 4, and Post at the 5. Very young, obviously front court in that scenario, but I like the size. I like the shooting. Moody, Santos, Post, all shooting the ball well here over recent games. So to me, that 10-man rotation is pretty good, right? Now, could they be dangerous over the second half of the season? I think they could be. Again, I think we underestimate the potential of having a shooting big man on the floor at, really all times here. In terms of the rest of the roster, you still have Trace Jackson-Davis in this scenario. Now, Looney would probably go out in the trade, but TJD, if you do at some point want a bit more athleticism, a little bit more defensive versatility maybe, then I think TJD is still on the roster. He can play. Maybe they do go to 11-man rotation and he's the 11th. You'd still have either Buddy Hield or Kyle Anderson. Now, I'm not factoring either of them into this rotation just because I actually think there's probably enough shooting that you could get away with just DNPing Buddy Hield. Now, sometimes some scenarios would call for him. I understand that, right? But, God, it's been frustrating. It's been so frustrating. I don't need to tell you guys. The Buddy Hield stuff has been ugly. It's been a disaster for a long time now. And I think not only should he not be starting, but after the deadline, the Warriors, pending health, should hopefully be in a position where he doesn't have to play at all. And as for Kyle Anderson, you would have thought that with Draymond, Kuminga, and Slow-Mo all out, that they would have been super eager for one of those guys to return. Well, Kyle Anderson was off the injury report against the Lakers and still didn't play. Guy Santos and Moses Moody still got those kind of power forward minutes there instead of him. So I don't know what's going on. I think that actually probably at this point be more keen on trading Anderson and maybe keeping Buddy Hield, because Buddy Hield is a starter right now as opposed to Slow-Mo, being out of the rotation completely. So one of those guys will probably still be on the team, you'd imagine, post-deadline, but I'm not factoring either into the rotation right now. You'd still have a guy like Lindy Waters III as well hanging around. And then you'd probably get another Bulls player in the Vucevic trade, whether it's Javon Carter, Torrey Craig, Chris Duarte. Again, maybe that is actually some kind of rotation player that you could use, but again, I'm not necessarily factoring that in too much. If there is a spot left over that the Warriors could sign a guy, I certainly do think Kevin Knox II deserves another NBA opportunity. He had another 35 points in the G League the other day. He's been absolutely tearing it up in the month of January, averaging nearly 30 points a game, shooting over 50% from the floor, efficient from three-point range as well. So that's kind of the roster and the rotation that I like post-deadline, and I think the Warriors, what they should do here is still go out and try and get Vucevic. Now, if they do need to give up a first-round draft pick, that's where things get complicated. If it's protected, like if it's lottery protected, then I think I would still do it, but I do understand hesitancy from the Warriors side to say, hey, even if we do give up a lottery-protected first-round pick, that's now a first-round pick we cannot use, right, to be able to trade perhaps in the offseason for a bigger name or something like that. The other thing about Vucevic I think that is important to note is that he's got a $21 million contract, obviously, for next season. And that's a big piece. Like, that's a big salary point to say, okay, Zion Williamson's available in the offseason. He's making $38 million or whatever else. All of a sudden, you've got Vucevic. You're over halfway there, right? And then you cobble together a couple of more salaries, and you could actually go and get a guy like that second star, whether it's Zion, whoever it may be. Obviously, the dream is Giannis at some point down the road here, but that day may never come. But that second star to pair with Steph, which the Warriors are still going to probably need, you'd imagine, to be back in any kind of contention next season as we project forward to that. But let me know what you guys, again, if you're on YouTube watching this, let me know what you guys think down in the comments of this rotation, who should be in, who should be out, what the Warriors should be trying to do here before the trade deadline. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that would be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at POK252, that's POK252 on X/Twitter. We're on Instagram, TikTok as well, at Golden State with Mates. The Warriors, who do we play? We play the Jazz tomorrow, Tuesday night. So should get a win in that one. I'll be back for a post-game live afterwards. If you can join me, that would be great and fantastic. Thanks again to you guys for the ongoing support. And until then, hope you have a great week ahead.